Welcome, everyone, to the CivMetrics Civic Development Podcast. I'm Ted Ballantyne, Editor-in-Chief of CivMetrics. Today, we have a great real-world discussion about P3s with two of the key people involved in the Washington, D.C. Streetlight P3 project. This was DC's first public-private partnership and a very successful one. This episode features a lot of insightful discussion about how to execute a successful P3 project, overcoming challenges, building trust in the community, and the lessons that were learned for future projects. And to break this all down, we have three infrastructure veterans joining us. Tom John is a partner in Taft Law's Public Affairs Strategies Group. Seth Gabriel is a principal at Taft Infrastructure Advisors. And Jeremy Ebie is the founder and CEO of the Phoenix Infrastructure Group. So, without further ado, here is their conversation.
Welcome this afternoon. We're privileged on the CivMetrics podcast today to have two great individuals. My name's Tom John. I'll be getting the privilege of talking to them. And Seth and Jeremy are both people who know P3 well, and I think we can learn a lot from today. Seth, let's start with you. Your leadership in the DC P3 office and now at Taft Infrastructure Advisors gives you dual insight into the DC Streetlight project and P3s in general. Can you tell us a little more about your background, how you got to be where you are, and how this has helped you?
Yes, I've been involved in P3s longer than I care to admit. It's been about 20 years in consulting, advisory capacity mostly, nonprofit management with some great folks at AI and a predecessor group to AI, and now at Taft Infrastructure Advisors after some time in the public sector. So it's been a very interesting ride so far. This is one of the great projects I like talking about. So thank you for the opportunity.
So, Jeremy, with your Phoenix Infrastructure Group, you've been involved in investing in a lot of great projects that have had community impact. And obviously, you're part of the consortium that delivered this project. Can you share with us your journey into infrastructure, how it got here, and what it's taught you?
And great to be on here as well. As noted, I was started my career off as a municipal investment banker. So I was underwriting bonds for states and cities, and we would, you do a general obligation bond where you don't really know where the money's going to, or you do a revenue bond where you know where the money's going to. It could be for a road or something like that. But either way, I felt you underwrite the bonds, and then the deal for you is done and life goes on. You may go on that road, you may go to that school that some of the taxes paid for, but I always wanted to get closer to what I was actually underwriting. And so I was in school while I was in banking, and I did my MBA at University of Chicago, where I'm from, and we did a trip to Canada, to Toronto, and we met with a bunch of investment funds. CCI, the Canadian Investment Fund, Borealis, OTPP, CC. I'm trying to remember. It's the largest funds, basically. And so we got a view that in Canada, private investors were investing and running infrastructure projects. Borealis at the time ran the airport, invested in and ran the airport that I flew out. So I thought someday, this is 2010, I graduated. I thought someday this would be happening in the US. And, I just continued to do banking and munis, moved to infrastructure finance. And then eventually I moved to DC and thought that, hey, maybe we could start a firm that invested in developing these assets, as I'd seen in Canada. And it was starting to happen in Chicago and where I was from. Parking meter deal, Chicago Skyway, Indiana Toll Road near you. And we took a leap of faith that these projects would come to the fore in the US. We knew that municipalities had challenges financially and had challenges really with delivering a lot of projects. Got to do a lot of things, but delivering projects is hard. And we thought there was a space for us to really participate. So that's when we started Phoenix.
It's a great story, which brings us to DC. The Genesis story. Seth, walk us through the aha moment that really led you and turned the idea of 75,000 streetlights into the largest urban streetlight P3.
Yeah. So a few things that really kind of led up to it, and I can only take some credit for this aha moment. There are a lot of great people within DDOT and the Office Public Private Partnership that worked on this project and really helped get it going. But it was through a few meetings, different conferences where you meet a lot of different people, and a few of those conferences that people they're talking about LED lights and how they were really, one, great for your environment, cost less, last longer, easy to maintain, and that they could be remotely controlled and monitored, and that you could put all sorts of other things. There's a big push at the time, especially of, well, what other technologies could we put on street poles? This is very valuable real estate in any urban area. You put all these things on, but it was all predicated on having enough bandwidth in terms of technology and electricity on each one of those poles. And the first step was, well, we have to have lights that use less electricity. So we open up the electricity in the grid for all this, everything else. And so we came back to DC and said, we could do that here. The district's one of the places that owns its own street poles in general, and it owns all the lights. Not the situation in every city. A lot of places that's very different. But having that ownership, that control, gave the district the ability to start looking at, can we do this better? Can we do this better through some sort of partnership? Can we do this better by utilizing new technology? Because the lights had not been updated in 40 plus years. And then also looking at the current situation when you came just down to the contract of how the lights were maintained. So like most places, the district didn't maintain its own lighting system. There was a contract, and in that case, several subcontractors, to the point that, well, at the end of the day or night, if the light wasn't working, no one really knew about it because there was no feedback and there were too many contracts. And so he just came and said, hey, we can do better both on a contractual term and a technology term.
Smart by design. Seth, the DC Streetlight project delivered LEDs, remote monitoring. What was the rationale for bundling these, and what other innovations can you see in the future for this project or other similar projects with respect to it?
Yeah. Well, again, it just makes a lot of sense. If you're going to go through the whole effort of changing the light bulbs, which was a lot harder than I thought it would be, and we had a lot of jokes about that, about changing the light bulbs, that you might as well go ahead and make sure that they are remote monitored and remote controllable. The technology is there, and it's really not cutting edge technology anymore. It's a cell phone. It's a remote control on a cluster of lights. It can be done and done in a cost-effective way and maintained in a cost-effective way. And so said, well, if we're going to build up the lights, we're going to make sure we can know that the lights are on, that they're working. If we're going to change the lights and go ahead and do this, we're going to make sure that MPD, the local police force, can control those lights if they need to, or emergency services can control those lights. And then there's other technology, as I mentioned, you can bundle in. We looked at doing public Wi-Fi. Some of that was built out in some places. You can look at, can you do video monitoring and enforcement of traffic for parking, which is used in some parts of the world. Once you have that system built out, you can do that. So there was all these possibilities. But again, it came back to, first we got to change the lights, and first we got to make sure we can control those lights. Because if you're just going to change the lights over to the LED lights, so now you just have lights that use less power. You still don't know if they're working.
So, Jeremy, you brought the equity, the investment in this, and earlier you were talking about that you really, it is a passion for you that you wanted to be involved in communities and investing in them. What were the specific financial and strategic and other motivations behind your involvement alongside partnering the project?
Great questions. Now, this project, the procurement, the industry day, the RFQ, RFI, RFQ period started in 2015, 2016 about. So that was around the time we started our company. We knew of the project ahead of time. We started off as an advisor initially. We were advising on different projects for the federal government. We did a couple of state and local projects. We knew we wanted to be an investor developer in the space. But we had relationships as a result of the pursuits we made in the investment space with institutional investors, with private capital that wanted to get into the infrastructure space. But it obviously was very difficult to get into deals. It's a long gestation process. So, we have access to capital. We were a locally certified firm. We're in DC. We looked at this as if, we definitely should participate. There were not a lot of firms like us at the time. There were no firms like us at the time at DC. And so we engaged potential partners, and we were coming in without having done a deal, but we had a few that were in the hopper. Baltimore Penn Station was one we were pursuing. We're looking at a few others in New York. But we presented to potential partners like, look, we're in the space. I've got an experience in the industry. My colleagues, one of my partners also has a space interest is involved in the space. He's a little more legal, but we're local. We have access to capital. We think we provide something that a lot of these teams, and I'm talking about the larger players in the space, didn't have. Some of them had no U.S. ties. Some of them, had not done a U.S. deal. Some of them had not. Definitely, many of them had not done a Streetlight P3 deal. No one had. So we thought we brought something special to the table, and so essentially we engaged a couple of firms. Fortunately, I had some experience with Plenary and just knew some folks on a personal level that just I liked. I liked the way that they engaged us, that they had a very smart crew, could deliver on a project, and were sensitive to the dynamics that I'm speaking about, us being local and being able to execute. And so that's kind of the story we came to them with, and we eventually partnered on participating as an investor. And, ultimately, and I'll go into it later, that role became critical to the project getting through. So in the end, it worked out.
So, timeline, you mentioned the length of the procurement, and anybody who's around the infrastructure industry knows that you can oftentimes have long ones. But on this, once project achieved financial close, broke ground, and in 14 months versus multi-year drag, it had actually, I believe, been completed. What's the reasoning for that, Seth? And tell us about how you can compress the timelines in the P3 structure.
Yeah, it was one of those things, especially with in a bit of defense of the long timeline for procurement. The first time you try to do anything, it just takes longer. And this is the first P3 for the district. It was also the first street lighting P3 in the U.S. of that kind of scale. There's a lot of technical issues that actually had to be worked out. But doing all that homework, building up the community support and getting the right partners like Jeremy allows a public owner to make up some of the time in the delivery part of it. And we always talk about the accelerated delivery of a public-private partnership, and this is a really good example of it. A lot of that work had been done. You find the right partner, and then that private sector partner is able to deploy capital, technology, and just construction people on the ground, or in this case, in bucket trucks, faster than you would be able to under any traditional method of delivery. And so it's just a good example of that model.
So, Jeremy, what has this taught you as you go look at other projects? As far as how you evaluate, are the things that came out of this and your ability to deliver in this case that help you really vet projects you're interested in other places?
So that's a great story, and I think what makes DC so interesting is it's a local project, and you realize as far as infrastructure is concerned in the United States, it's been owned and financed by localities for the most part. Unless you're talking about toll roads, everything else is owned by some special district or, the school district or the water district or whoever, transportation district. So essentially that is one piece. So I look for a few things. I'm just going to know a few things that we look for as a project when we look at the procurement. There are two levels of leadership. People, one, I look for overall a leader at the top who presents a vision for a project, okay, or for a series of projects that tie into our initiative for being a private investor in infrastructure. And we had that. Mayor Bowser brought forward the P3 legislation that created the P3 office and identified this project as one of those projects. So we had that, check the box. Two, you look for an agency head, someone more at the delivery level that is engaged and responsible, and they're a person that's required to get this job done. And we've had Seth, we had Catherine Ruse, we had people that were directly tied to this project, their careers and their success was tied to our success. You got someone in the top division, you got someone at the agency level. So we saw that. And then you see, is this a project that's obviously financeable through a P3? A big part of it is the credit rating of your counterparty. DC is AAA credit at the time. I think they're AA now, but they're still really good credit. And do they have the financial capability of really placing that item in their budget, and paying it. If it's an availability payment, paying that availability payment. Now we're talking about a concession you're overall looking, if you're running a different model, like can the project itself pay for itself? So those are kind of the high level. Do they show some sensibility in that project, in their process, RFI process, RFP process, RFP, all of that? Are they organized? They have their act together so that we're not all wasting time. Those are all the things that kind of come together when you've got that double tiered leadership.
Makes perfect sense. So the project deliberately included hiring local workforce. You talked about how local it was and the fact that you had that local perspective. Um, how did you go about ensuring the meaningful local investment? I mean, it's obviously important to you, and inclusion throughout the design, construction, even the O&M phase of this.
So this is very important. As far as local lift is concerned, this is a big part of the whole project. One, you need capacity generally for within your community for these kind of roles to be filled. And the strategy that we had with Plenary, and we're part of that dynamic when you talk about the finance developer role. I mean, you have investor developer, you've got verticals related to legal, you've got verticals related to construction, verticals related to program management, project delivery. And so our strategy together was and we do this typically, we've done this with Plenary before actually. We'll get global expertise participant at the top, local participant, that's reputable and tied in locally as well. So that combination is generally what works. We always seek to do that, and we seek to do that at every vertical. You're going to see that in all successful projects. You've got large scale investors that are international investors who look at all projects. You've got a local investor that also is in the space and knows what they're doing. You've got a large scale lawyer, the legal. You also bring some level of some local legal as well. And again, it goes on and on. Construction. You may sometimes just go all local construction, but in some cases you bring a higher level, international level construction because they have that financial capacity. They can really take on the bonding, and you merge them with a construction firm that's reputable, that's in your space. So we did that at every level, which is why I think it was successful. But why I think in the end, when we brought the project forward to council for vote, not go into that, that's why that was the first question that came up. We want to see jobs. You're going to hire locally. Definitely construction, you're going to hire locally because it's most efficient cost-wise. But who are you contracting that's actually going to own this job? Are they local? Are they proficient? We understand you have all these international folks. It's great they're from Canada, but we're in the District of Columbia right now. Things get local. So that was the factor we always tried to play within the project. We talked about lifting. I think ultimately that's what lifts up within the community, that dynamic.
Successfully so. So beyond LEDs, energy usage dropped by more than 50%, emissions by 38,000 tons a year, energy costs by greater than 70%, Seth. Were there any platform plug-and-play features you planned for future beyond lighting? And you may have referenced some of this, but maybe also even outside of streetlights per se, but for the office that you thought dovetailed well off of this project?
Is that to me, Tom?
That's to you.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. There are quite a few things. We had looked at trying to build out as much public Wi-Fi as possible. DC has its own internet loop. Like I said, it deployed some places. Definitely some growth that can still go on there because of just the nature of the network being set up. And there are just endless technologies that keep coming out now. Like I said, the enforcement of parking, the weather, traffic, anything that related to roadway transit, you can have that technology on there. Beyond that, and this is something I know is very close to your heart, Tom. Once we get to autonomous vehicles that are going to drive themselves, self-driving vehicles, they actually operate on a network. It's not just the car driving itself. It has to have connectivity to know where it is. And if we're going to be successful in having self-driving vehicles, to whatever that might look like, it does require technology to be on the street pole, especially in urban areas, so those vehicles know what street they're on and when they can turn and what's going on around them. By building out this network again and just having at the very baseline electricity available It's not going to the larger lights, now to the LED lights, but also having ability to put in that fiber because you now have the space for it, because the lights physically are smaller. The weight is less on the pole itself. This is just very old school engineering meeting new technology. You can put other things on the pole because now the pole's not holding up a heavy arm and heavy light. It's holding up this light LED light on a much smaller arm. You can have those technologies that will enable in the future having self-driving vehicles because it will be able to communicate with that mesh network. It can piggyback ultimately onto the network used for the lights. It can be piggyback onto a new network, whatever's built out. And so that's kind of the grand vision of this was step one of building a smarter city using smarter lights.
So I know you had some challenges as far as people coming and not appreciating what it would mean for LED versus otherwise, maybe concerns about colors and other things of the lights. And um, what are the lessons, and I'd like to hear from each of you, you learned about how you move past some of those things and deal with your various stakeholders, some of which are internal that Jeremy's talked about, but also externally, there are a lot of people who will take pot shots and or can hold up projects. What are the lessons learned from what you've lived through in that trench? And maybe start with you,
Yeah, I
Jeremy.
mean, that's a great question, Tom. I'm from Chicago, where we did Chicago did the Streetlights deal, which got a lot of negativity, and they haven't done a deal since. Still reeling from that one 15 years later. So public public opinion, public engagement is so critical. And when we talk about, especially as I noted before, getting the full support of an executive, like a mayor or a city manager who's got their face on a project, that is so critical that the project, for the most part, um, you know, can survive the pot shots. So for streetlights, we had pot shots across different levels that I can go into a little bit. I mean, we had and I'm talking about when we had transportation council committee meetings, that were held by, Councilwoman Che back in the day. You had all kinds of groups that came forward and had their own concerns. Now, I'm not going to say that none of them were valid. All of them were valid because they're concerns. They took the time to go to council. We live in a democracy still. Let's that those all need to be brought forward. And so you'd have groups like, for example, the conservancy group came forward saying that, at one point, that improving the lights would have an effect on the birds. I don't know if you remember that one, Seth. That was one that came up
Yes.
in transportation meetings, and therefore you shouldn't improve the lights. You should reconsider. There's another group that had concerns about privacy, that if we were talking about some of the privacy dynamics that Seth just noted, that would really give way, or an avenue for, more intrusion into who am I calling, who am I talking to, what am I saying. So I believe we had the ACLU at some of the committee meetings as well. And then you've got, through the ANC meetings, which are in DC, the advisory council meetings are like a local group. We had a lot of opinions on what the temperature of the lights should be, where they should be placed, should they be replaced, what does that look like? So you had all kinds of concerns and potential interest, which is fine, which is the way things are. This is a broad project that covers everyone. But I think there were no arguments. Well, I think the project succeeded. There were no arguments on a few fronts. One, reducing the gas, the carbon imprint of the project, of just generally from gas to LED. And then two, the potential savings. Once we got the word of the savings out, that really sold a lot of people that may not have had an opinion on other things, but just cared about the financial effect. So I think on the whole, you've got to navigate those kind of pot shots. You have to be honest and earnest about it. And the way we did that is, in Seth's office put together a value for money model. They identified to the T every positive dynamic the project brought forward, and then we delivered. So that's the way you get around that.
So Seth, for somebody getting ready to do a project somewhere else, what's the silver bullet for how you deal with the stakeholders that may be concerned, whether it's birds, or in Indiana's case, when we passed daylight savings time, it was that the cows would know what time to get milk. So how do you deal with these things?
Yeah. Two things. One, as Jeremy alluded, listen to those concerns. Where we started in our thinking of what the lights would be, was not where it ended up. And a lot of that I give credit to some community groups that had some real ideas, educated themselves, and boy, did they know what they're talking about when it came to Kelvin temperature. We went into it not knowing what Kelvin temperature was, and now I probably have a PhD in Kelvin temperature, but because of these community groups, and we have better lights for it. Quite, we just have better lights. And the industry actually started moving towards the light Kelvin temperature this group wanted, because everyone realized, oh, we can do this, and this makes sense. Two, and I have said this in many places, you overshare. We had a website. We were on Twitter at the time, all the social medias. We had the mayor out there talking about it. We had the head of the district department of transportation, myself at these ANCs, any venue, any opportunity to talk about the project. And so that people knew what was going on, we took that opportunity. Because the last thing you want is when the vote comes down, and in a lot of places you have to have a final vote. You don't want people saying, I don't know what you're talking. What is this project? What is this? That's the worst thing. You want to overshare, educate aggressively, so that no one can say, oh, I didn't hear about it. And the answer could be, well, you didn't pay attention to, like everyone else knew what was going on. You have to, as the public, as the owners, get out there and make sure, kind of almost force the information upon everyone so that everyone knows what's going on. If they have concerns, give them an opportunity to have those concerns, address the concerns the best you can, and then accept that you can't make everyone happy. Unfortunately, it's how it is in infrastructure, and then stick with that plan. And it takes Jeremy's point brought up, having a chief executive willing to go out there and do it, having the next line of executives willing to go to those meetings that are on a Monday night at 8 p.m. all over the district and sit there as long as it takes, because that's really educate the people who own this. It's their asset ultimately. It's their lights.
I think those are all good points for other communities thinking about these. Listen and communicate, right? So risk and reward. Critics caution about the novel risks inherent in an expensive and first of the kind deal like this, Jeremy. What kept your team up at night? What risk, financial, operational, political, we talked a little bit about, but actually materialized, and how did you handle it?
So where do I start? Let's kind of continue through the political. So when this is common amongst a lot of projects, you will go through an RFP process, you'll select a winner, and then you will continue through the analysis, go through your process of getting to an agreement once you're kind of in this exclusive negotiation period. And after all of that, and you come to an agreement, you've got to take that agreement and present it back to council. This is what we're up to. We need a vote on this. This could be a year and a half later, and who knows how many millions of dollars of advisors and work and time done. So you got to bring that forward, and it's got to be voted upon, and it's got to pass. Otherwise, all that work is in the dustbin. So we, of that when you're going through this, but you don't really think about it constantly. You presume that that's just going to continue to be what it is. It's going to continue to, we selected us. We're going to go through the process. We're going to get voted through. We're going to be fine. But when you get to that process of the vote, it is nerve-wracking. It kept us up, and we needed a supermajority vote. We had 13 votes on council. One person had to recuse themselves because their cousin was a subcontractor, like a subcontract, which is fine. But they had to recuse. So now you got 12 votes, and you needed a supermajority vote. That's 9 votes, right? And some councilmen who, by the way, are dealing with the issues in their neighborhood. A lady, grandma wants to get someone to look at her curb site. There's some fire hydrants out. We got a crime issue. We have many things going on, and you want me to vote on this deal. Washington, D.C. has a law that any project or contract above $1 million requires council vote. Okay, so that was a big risk we had, and I'll give DC government, our partners in the agency and DDOT credit that they basically made the full effort of presenting to council members on their own time why this project should be voted for, why it should go through, why the city should commit to being a partner to PIDC. They did their work, but it kept us up really late and really nervous. And I don't think I've ever been more nervous on a vote on a council vote in my life. So that was one. The other one is financial. So we get approval. And now we've got to come to financial close. I can't remember what our period was for financial close. And we had about, after the vote, maybe about 2-3 months, something like that. I can't remember exactly. We closed in 22. I can't remember it was summer 22, May 22. If you take a note, then that was the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war. So interest rates were shooting up, flying all over the place. You were dealing, I think we were actually in the tail end of COVID, so you're still somewhat in COVID. Interest rates are going crazy. We've got a financial model that requires interest rates not to get too crazy. Otherwise, this thing is going to go out of affordability. So we were nervous on where rates were going to be at the time of our close. Fortunately, we landed within the range of affordability, but it was an issue that really kept us up. We were really looking at markets because we had to so you understand, we're underwriting some bonds that are related to the deal that are tied directly to interest rates. So rates were an issue. That kept us up at night. So now we got the money. Okay, great. At that point, you're now moving into, working with the district, working with the partners at DDOT, et cetera, to get this thing delivered. And time is money. And you've got a series of folks, both local and NG, equans that are getting ready, that are putting themselves out there to develop this product, to push the transition. And so every day, it wasn't as nerve-wracking, but it was every day. How are we doing on delivery? And finally, we got to, this past May, we did our 75,000 lights. We completed the project. Now we completed the transition. Now we've got operations maintenance for the next period of time. But all that, everything keeps you up, but it's like the degree kind of gets lowered to like, now we're like, okay, O&M, that's fine. So that captures it, I think.
So you actually mentioned COVID. So it was completed, or actually you closed right, at least as we were kind of coming out of the COVID side. It wasn't as much in 22, but certainly depending where you were, you still had ramifications from it. Did any of the pandemic turbulence derail anything materially, either during the procurement or after, or heading into financial close and delivery? Are there any lessons that you've learned from navigating that period that should be taken into account by others in separate
Yeah,
trying
I'll
times?
ask Seth maybe as well, but it did seem like, I mean, for sure, COVID probably delayed our procurement period. Just the city was dealing with many other things. Once we all kind of normalized to the reality of COVID and as it got more managed, I think the project really took off as far as the procurement, the rest of the negotiation to close the deal, procurement process. But it did slow things down for sure. Government just shut down, for a period right in the middle of the procurement. So it was an effect. And I noted the financial dynamics that were related to COVID, just for the markets in general. But there's no doubt COVID was an impediment, but in some ways it brought things kind of to focus. People focused on this project. We were working through COVID. And I think the big factor we could talk about social dynamics is we had internet. We were able to get out there to connect like this online. A good quarter of the city had no access to internet. If not 30% of the city, 40% of the city had no access to internet. And it became a focus. We were going to add, we're still in discussions, as Seth noted, this is part of a dynamic that can be added to the project. Wireless access and making that a global dynamic in DC, a global access to internet in DC became a highlight because you couldn't get your health care checkups. You couldn't get to work if you couldn't do any work unless you had internet access. So it highlighted some issues, some gaps, some inequities in the city as well. So some ways it was an impediment. In some ways it put things into focus.
So, Seth, as someone who's been on the public and private side, what's one myth about P3s that still drives you crazy?
I mean, the stock answer is it's not free money, but I think we've convinced almost everyone of that. I think one of the other myths is that you as the owner, magically all your problems are going to be transferred over to your private partner. And that is certainly not the case. It is a partnership. There's still risk on both sides of the ledger. You cannot transfer the political risk. You transfer a lot of those risks cannot go over. And if you transfer too much, it does cost a lot more than it should. And so that myth of, oh, here you go, it's all Jeremy's problem now, he's gonna keep the lights on, well, that's not true. That's never true. So the real answer is this is still a partnership. For many people talk about, we forget the last P a lot of times. Tom, I think you say this a lot. We forget the partnership part of this, and that's really what it needs to be about.
Jeremy, let's ask you about this because, as Seth said, I think sometimes there's this thought that's, oh, we'll just hand it the private sector and they'll figure out. Whether it's that or something else, what is the myth about P3s that drives you crazy?
Well, I guess everyone says the same one: free money. It's not free money. That's the one. It's not free money. It is an ability for you to manage your investment, your own investment in your own assets. We basically give you a lot of time to reduce your risk financially and spread your payments out over the life of a project to the point that you can afford it and you can manage it. We're not just giving money away. So I think that sometimes when governments, I don't think this happens that often, but sometimes it happens. Once you get on a roll where they say, well, I've got this really not financially feasible project. Can you just pay for it and take all the risk on it? And you're sitting here like, I don't want to do that. I like you. I think you guys, I like working with you, but this is a project that is not for me or not for anyone that's trying to do business. And when I say do business, we're at market risk. We can go out of business if we don't deliver, but we don't want to go out of business if because we're just involved in the bad deal. And so to that end, in the partnership dynamic, this speaks to kind of an availability payment. If you have us on a project that's an AP, we're going to put the money up front. We're going to build the asset quickly for you. We're going to run the asset. You do have to meet milestone payments. You do have to pay. You do have to pay back us for delivering the asset as we contractually promised we would. And of course, if we don't pay us in the same way. But there's an agreement here. It's not free money.
So, Seth, thinking about the DC model as something that can be a base for something else, what are the other ways that it could be utilized or expanded for urban upgrades? Broadband infrastructure, EV charging, smart sensors. You were talking about facilitating autonomous vehicles earlier. What do you think is the next iteration of the structure from this deal that could be used to help solve urban problems?
That's a good question. Not I. When you look at tightly populated areas, so urban areas, it actually gives you a lot of ability to leverage public-private partnerships in unique ways that you can't in a lot of other places. Sure, you probably can't do toll roads necessarily. You could do congestion charging for sure, but it also allows you to do things like the streetlights, like building out public Wi-Fi and broadband because it's in a compact area. Most of these urban areas have very old water, stormwater, wastewater systems. And I think we anyone who's listening to this, anyone in the industry knows that this is the big thing. I've said this now for 20 years, water is the next market, but really I think we're there because you have systems that have just been taxed to the point that they cannot function the way they are. And having a private partner come in and help with that, I think is a really way to go. We can get into some of the current environment when we're looking at housing and the need for more housing. Is conversion office to apartments a thing? We'll see. I'm not sure it's played out. Or is there a way of taking some of those office buildings and doing unique things that may free up other housing within an area? So it is a great incubator. Cities are a great incubator for P3s. For most of our history, both of was toll roads, transit, airports. Okay. And now I think we're finally in a place where, okay, now we can do social infrastructure. We can do that in a meaningful way in urban areas. Because let's be honest, if you have enough people and we keep mutual friends talking about the people aggregator. What are we building that aggregates people? That brings in the revenue needed to backstop these projects.
Jeremy, what's your perspective? Is Seth all wet?
I think Seth has some good points. I see it a little bit differently. So, um, what we kind of look for, what I personally look for, when I think the really the kind of the sweet spot is if you can create one I do, but the one thing I do agree with 100% is cities and localities are where infrastructure is going to happen. You have the most deals, you have the most assets, you have the most people being affected, centers of humanity, all that. What I think about as an investor when you're just kind of you're kind of critiquing where do we go, what do we want to get involved in. I tend to look for projects that create kind of treble effects. So when I say that, the treble economic effects. So when I think about that, I think, Seth noted oriented development is one where you can really create treble effects. If you build out a transit facility or build out a line through the the way that commercial interests, retail, and office and all that will follow, it could be tremendous. Just take a look at the Silver Line in Tyson's Corner. It reshaped the whole place. So when you can do that, you can incentivize a government, say, hey, look, we've created this train station. You built around all this commercial. Now you guys get to reap all the tax revenue from the property. That's what we're looking for. These kind of treble effects. Airports have that same effect, where I can build out a facility or improve a facility. We put capital in, we make it a more attractive site. We create jobs directly, people working at that site, and all those treble businesses that are around the airport, parking, rentals, all that, all those different businesses, restaurants, all that around that business. Right. So that's one kind of class of investments. I think that, when you talk about the social stuff, social assets, that is, and water, I would throw in there because it's like these required assets that are inelastic and we need to have. And it's part of like what you just provide to, say, some schools, water systems, good water, wastewater systems. Those are more like, we can't afford to do this well or quickly. We can't financially afford to prove it. Can you come in here, build it out for us, and over time we'll pay you back? That's when you have those kind of assets in my opinion. There aren't any treble effects for starting a, for building it. Yeah, there are some for a school. They're not really direct treble economic effects for building a water wastewater system. There aren't. Maybe you may be cutting jobs, truthfully, if you make a really good system. But what you're doing is, we've got to have it. I've got to finance it. I may be strapped. If I don't provide this, I'm not providing the services of a good government. So I think those are kind of the ways that we look at investments, we look at projects. There's opportunity for all. And then you talk about toll roads. That's simply, we're going to improve this asset for you. You may not be able to afford it to do it right now. We're going to take on the risk, essentially, of doing this because we believe this is a purely inelastic asset. So it's kind of how we see those kind of assets.
Beginning to wrap up here. We're about at time. Jeremy, what part of this project makes you the most proud?
So first, baby, I live in DC. I'm a proud. I'm a Chicagoan originally. I'm a Midwestern boy originally, but I'm a proud. DC is a city where everyone's coming to. This is the city of the world. Definitely the city of America, and it's great to be able to look at really a great project. Come out and see our lights if you're listening at night. It looks like Christmas everywhere. I'm not kidding, but to see lights that quality and see a project you're involved in, and I can show my kids that, I'm very proud of that. And two, the other dynamic is seeing the city do a procurement well and cleanly. That's very complex, that no one has done yet. And I think some folks are looking at and starting to look at if they can do it as well. The city, the district being a North Star, lodestar for this is what also makes me very proud.
So then, Seth mentioned North Stars. What do you think the North Star of the future of P3s is overall and in public infrastructure, and what kind of projects are next, or you think we should be headed to? You said some of this as far as cities, but overall for the industry, where should we be tacking to, or what are the issues we should be thinking about?
Yeah, it's as you said, cities. I mean, don't discount transport. It's always going to be there. Still works really well for P3s, but I think the big thing we really have to focus on, and as an industry, we're always refining it, but efficiency in both communication, public engagement, and contracting, and it really comes down to transparency throughout. And that's something we talk about a lot in P3s. Like this system, the way we conduct business in infrastructure is ultimately more transparent than any other way of achieving that same goal. And whether it's streetlights or a toll road or a seaport, the way we do it through honest, competitive, factors coming in, make sure that the industry knows what's going on, that they feel that, like Jeremy feels, he has a fair shot versus anyone else on any project anywhere, because the books of that procurement are open, and that the residents, the owners of that asset, ultimately feel that they're getting the best value because they can see it, they understand what's going on. It's not you brought the black box. It's not the mystery of public procurement that people, what did, nope, it's right there. Here you go. Come to the hearing. It's all on the website. I think that's really the future. If we can keep just drilling down, working on having transparency and contracts that anyone can understand, I think we're going to have ultimately more and more support for this model.
So, Jeremy, let you close it out. What would you tell you were in your intro talking about being a young investment banker and seeing the infrastructure and really looking to the future of it? What's the piece of advice you would give to that young man, knowing what you know now as he embarked on that mission, and what others maybe could take from that?
Persistent and be patient. That goes for any young guy. Be patient, be persistent. These relationships are really long. Be a nice guy, be a nice girl. Look to partner rather than just look to beat someone, because you're going to see them on the other end. They're going to be around. You never know who you're going to need. Especially when it comes down to these projects, be a good partner. Don't look to get over one on your partner, because we're seeing it where if someone got a bad deal, if someone got a bad deal, they'll never forget it. Especially if it was on purpose, especially if it's a government agency, someone will always be reminding you about the bad deal you got back when. I mean, the parking meter deal could be an example where they bring it up over and over and over. So just try to be decent and look to partner. That's what you're looking to do. And the great thing about infrastructure, we're just trying to, in this P3 space, we're just trying to spread risk across to people who can manage it.
Well, with that, I think those are great words to end on. Thank you both for your time and great conversation today.
Thank you, Tom.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
I want to thank Tom, Seth, and Jeremy for the very insightful conversation. Thank you for watching, everyone, and join us next time for more civic development insights.